Good evening. Our group is gonna talk about this beautiful lady tonight. So our theme is the women's poverty problem in China. And our PPT will follow this content outline. First, we will talk about the introductions. Poverty is a very complex problem. According to the general theory of economics, poverty is the general terms of economic, social, and cultural poverty and backwards. But above all, it refers to economic categories of poverty, namely material poverty. Poverty generally refers to material difficulties. That is, a person's or family living standard do not meet a social acceptable minimum standard. According to the research group, Research on Poverty in China, Urban Residents, and China's Rural Poverty Center of National Bureau of Statistics, the lack of certain essential means of livelihood and service and are living in a very difficult situation. And the poverty in China, and here is a picture of the poverty cities in each province, and there are 592 poverty cities in the national level, including 217 in the central regions and 37 in the western regions. The proportions of China's population living extremely poverty dropped from 61% in 1990s to less than 30% in 2002, and the first to have the proper proportions. In 2014, it dropped to 4.2%. And the first is the meanings of poverty abbreviations. In the word poverty, eradication is usually referred to as anti-poverty. On the basis of specific national conditions, China's called anti-poverty as poverty abbreviations. Emphasizing more on the main body of poverty abbreviations and the government's behavior. In terms of vocabulary, we can see poverty abbreviation highlight the specific behavior of poverty management. It means that through the government-specific governance, financial assistance, policy support, and human intelligence support and other means, the poor population can be helped so as to achieve the goal of poverty alleviation. And the second one is China's poverty alleviation criteria. Before 2008, China had two poverty alleviation standards, absolute poverty line and relative poverty line. The absolute poverty line is the standard line that determines the absolute poverty population in the rural area, and the relative poverty line is the standard line that determines the low-income population in rural area. In 2008, the country merged the absolute poverty line and the relative poverty line. The unification of two standards is conducted to the accuracy of the implementations of poverty alleviation plans and simplifications of policy implications, and the formulations of a new standard has facilitated the formulations of poverty alleviation policies and implementations of poverty alleviation plan, and has played a certain role in promoting poverty alleviation work. Now we will talk about the current situations of poverty amongst Chinese women. In our country, traditional concepts and ways of divisions of labor still exist widely. The National Bureau of Statistics has released a statistical and monitoring report on 2018-19 programs for development of Chinese women. The report shows that poverty among rural women has been significantly reduced. Based on the Rural Poverty Center of 2,300 yuan per person per year at 2010 prices, China's rural poor population stood at 5.51 million at the end of 2019, 160 million fewer than 2010, and about half of them were women. The incidence of poverty was 0.6% and 16.6 percentage point lower than 2010, and there was no significant gender differences in the incidence of poverty. And what causes happened? And the first is institutional reasons. The first is the negative impact of policy making. In order to reduce the birth rate, China introduced mandatory family planning measures in 1979, including the one-children policy, which have the negative impact on the mortality rate of female infants. Chinese family tradition is the preference of son over than daughter, and the family must obey the regulations of the government, which leads to lack of women's right to survive. Secondly, the rural land policy security system is incomplete. In our country, there are provisions that officially protect women's right to land and political life, but some customs in rural areas deprive women of those rights. Gender inequality in the land ownership brings serious pressure to women, resulting in women being more likely to fall into material and spiritual poverty than men. The second one is social custom. The first is cultural custom. Despite the emphasis on gender equality in today's market, the traditional Chinese belief that women are superior to the women is deeply rooted. This mentality has led to women's subordinations to their husbands and fathers in home. Women receive such less investments in education at a very young age than men of the same conditions. Therefore, the woman's innate inferiority to the man's consciousness in society life and employment promotions to women have set of scaled. Secondly, family traditions and customs. In family, it is difficult for women to be equal in productive resource and local welfare. For example, married women in rural areas are out of the ownership of responsible land and homestead, as well as the rights to share divisions in the village. The women in some backward areas often have no access to formal education and can only dedicate to others through practice. The last one is the lack of right. The lack of women's right and interest is mainly reflected in resources, such as material resources, education and training resources, social participation resources, and etc. All those indicate that women cannot control social resources and occupy development opportunities as men do in the real society. The low level of participation of women in daily activity is due to their relative bad lack of access to economic resources. In the rural China, land and capital ownership is often occupation towards male member of this family, and the lack of guaranteed resource make it more difficult for women to escape poverty. So next pass to our group mate to talk about the next part.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Peggy. As my groupmates mentioned, women's poverty usually occurs in rural areas. Compared with urban women, rural women's family status, education level, job position, and social welfare are relatively low. Today, I will introduce a case of rural women's poverty in China from a special perspective, taking the poverty alleviation of rural female-handed households in Qingba mountain area of southern Shanxi as an example. Firstly, I want to introduce the current situation. The Qingba Mountain area spans 5 provinces and 1 city in Shanxi, Gansu, Sichuan, Chongqing, Hubei, and Henan. There are 76 destitute countries with poverty population of 3,025 million. As a special group of women in poverty-stricken mountain area, the poverty of rural female-handed households has a characteristic of integrating structures, complexity, uniqueness, and vulnerability. Before analyzing the problem in depth, it's necessary to make a brief statement on the concept of female-handed household. As we all know, in many rural areas of our country, the hands of households are mostly men. The situation in which women become hands of household can be roughly divided into 3 types. One is the family where only single mother and their children live together due to divorce or other reasons. And the other is that the husband loses the ability to work due to illness or disability, and the family income source mainly depends on the wife's labor income. And the third is that a woman's family has no male heirs and need to recruit a son-in-law to continue the family. Compared with male hands of household, female hands of household are affected by traditional cultures, social system, and their own factors, and their vulnerability in resisting various external risk impacts make them and their family members more likely to fall into poverty. The following is an analysis of the livelihoods of rural female-handed households in Qingba Mountain area in southern Shanxi and the reasons for their poverty based on actual surveys. It shows the age structure and education levels. It can be seen from the table that middle-aged women over 40 years old constitute the main body of the hands of household. From the perspective of the education level of female hands of household, the overall education level of poor female hands of household is relatively low, which makes the social results that this group can obtain and use are relatively small. And next page, we can see the family structure and the family population size. The main family with 3 generations of grandparents and grandchildren account for the largest proportion. The nuclear family is second. The survey data reflects from one aspect that female-handed family has a small population and a general shortage of family labor, and most of the production and operation can only maintain small-scale production. And next page, we can know the main source of family income. The income source and income structure of female-handed households in Qingba Mountain area are very simple. First, income from agricultural production, accounting for about 17% of the total family income. Secondly, income from migrant work, accounting for 20%, and third, income from the breeding industry, nearly 10%. The fourth is part of government living allowance. Compared with hands of household, female hands of household play the role of family caregivers, which makes it difficult for them to spare more time and energy to work or engage in other part-time activities. But we can find in the rural area of Qingba Mountains area, the mean annual consumption expenditure of female-handed households are children's education expense, medical treatment, daily consumption, the high proportion of household subsistence consumption, and the low poverty of productive consumptions. Indicates that the family's livelihood is difficult to maintain. Although the Although many women have strong desire to get rid of poverty, they are affected by a variety of unfavorable factors, making them don't know how to improve their ability to get rid of poverty. In summary, there are dilemmas facing poverty alleviation. 1. There is a gender blind spot in the identification of poor households in the implementation of the targeted poverty alleviation policy. 2. The role confusion faced by impoverished female-handed of households in the fighting against poverty. 3. The poor ecological environment has exacerbated the degree of local impoverishment and affected the health of poor female hands of household. 4. Poor female hands of household are not well educated. 5. Poor female-handed households lack social capital and weak social support network. Therefore, the path to improve the ability of poor rural women to get rid of poverty needs to start with policy support, social security, human capital, and social network, and the endogenous motivation and capacity building of women. If the degree of women's liberation is a yardstick of social civilization and progress, then women's poverty alleviation can be said to be a necessary condition for women to move towards freedom and liberation. On the current situation, the ability of rural women in poverty-stricken areas could get rid of poverty is a difficult and complex systematic project that requires the cooperation of the government, the market, and the society to intervene in the formulation and development of anti-poverty policies. For rural women from a gender perspective, the implementation process and the establishment of the long-term interactive mechanism has a great significance for effectively achieving poverty alleviation of impoverished rural women and female-handed households, and effectively blocking the intergenerational transmission of poverty. That's all my content. Thank you. Next, Lin Pei will introduce a case of minority women's poverty.
Thank you, Peggy. Hello, I'm Lin Pei. My part is minority women's poverty. Poverty is one of the most acute social problems in today's world. China is a multi-ethnic developing country composed of the 56 ethnic groups except the Han are all minorities. Among the 55 ethnic minority groups, a serious social anomaly has emerged, namely a large gap in social poverty. And the proportion of the women in this part of the population in poverty is increasing. With the development of the society, the goal of the building a well-off society in all around way is also being realized, and solving the problem of the poverty has become the key. I'm going to talk about the three parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about briefly about the case of the minority women being poverty and the reason why they are poverty. The second part, talking about types of the poverty. The third part is looking for at the why minority women are poorer than normal women. Let me briefly introduce the basic situation of this case. Ningxia County is located in the southwest of the Ningxia Hui autonomous prefecture with a total population of the 370,500 people, of which 357,900 are agricultural people, accounting for 96.6% of the total population. The total area of Lingsha County is 12,124 square kilometers, and the total cultivated land is 376,200 mu. The reason for the poverty of this place is the poor natural ecological condition. Because of this, its high terrain is not conducive to the growth of the crops. In the investigation of the Hui woman's ability to participate in society in Manisgo Township, Ningxia County, Northwest Gansu Province, we found that among the 50 samples, their education level is very low. Most of the women are illiterate and they have no received education. It was a place with a large population, but little land, few factories, and few employment opportunities for women. Local men think women should only do manual work such as farming. They are very closed-minded. They think that men should go out to work, women should stay at home. They don't need to learn new knowledge. Most women said they would not accept the chance of the re-education because they said that once women were literate, they would be left by their families and neighbors if they went out to find a job. The table shows that the education level in this place is very low. Most people's education level is primary school level. They have no knowledge and learning ability, and it's difficult for them to get rid of poverty. When it comes to reasons why people here are poor, they believe that the link of the education is an important cause of the poverty. The single life of the being born, being raised, being married, and being a mother is a life path repeated by generations of the women here. Due to the link of the basic education, this Hui woman could not walk out of the mountain, and then even if they did, they were not competent enough to cope the outside world. Now it's a high technology area. They do not have the basic education and the scientific and cultural knowledge. Just like they do not know how to use mobile phone, computer, internet. So whether they are engaged in family farming or industry and commerces, services in family farming or in industry and at a discovery in a computation. Therefore, the current educational level of the minority women has a direct impact on their economic participation and development. According to the survey, China's minority women in poverty can be divided into the following two types. The first group are particular poor single mothers. The second group is unemployed female workers. A group of poor women commonly referred into the women's poverty studies. Most of these people are women who have divorced. According to the statistics, the divorce rate in China is 7%, and the trend is increasing every year. Unemployment is an inevitable project problem in a special historical period of the China's social transformation, and its most direct consequence is the income reduction of the unemployed. In recent years, most enterprises in our country have taken a reduction of the personnel in order to improve economic efficiency. In order to improve the efficiency of the work, there are measures to improve the efficiency of work. There are measures to divert personnel. A large number of the jobs suitable for women have also been laid off, which has brought a greater impact on women's employment. According to statistics from the Ministry of the Labor, women workers account for about 59% of the laid off workers in China. After a large number of the investigations on cases of the poor minority women, we found that there are many reasons for minority women to be poorer than normal women, including the following four main reasons. First, economic income reasons. Although there is no clear data on the sex ratio of the poor population in China, it's difficult for minority women to get out of poor areas and get better paid jobs in big cities due to the influence, the general education level and the low training level of the minority women. The biggest problem of the minority women in employment is that the number of employment people is small and the level is low, and they are generally in obverse disadvantaged position in employment, which is also one of the main reasons why minority women are mostly in poverty. Second, the reasons for participation in social development. The division of the labor in family still has impact on model people's life. The conflict between the form of the consort family and the model inequality between men and women still has a negative impact on the educational level of the ethnic minority women, which to a large extent hinders them from becoming rich. Third, the reason of the social status. Minority women generally lack independent spirit, subject to consequences and economic status, which makes it difficult for them to participate in social development. They cannot participate in decision making of the public efforts, making women basically lose the political voice. They have no social status. Fourth, the reasons for good health. With the development of the society and the economy, the physical health of the ethnic micro minority women has also improved to a certain extent. However, due to the differences in economic and medical development levels in different regions, the physical health of the ethnic minority women in different regions is relative poor. Inadequate medical service in some remote areas as well as local customers such as early marriage and early childbearing are all adverse factors affecting the health status of the ethnic minority women. Some ethnic minority women living in the mountains areas have too few cans of food, and it's difficult for them to get enough nutrients. They are generally prone to anemia. Poor health conditions and trade costs also have a significant impact on women's economic income. There are many reasons for the poverty of the minority women. We should not only look at the appearance of the poverty, but analyze the reasons behind poverty and solve the problem from the root cause. When the root problem is solved, poverty will no longer become a problem. Next, my groupmate Betty will talk about a woman poverty alleviation policy.
Hello, I'm Betty. I'm going to talk about women poverty elimination policy. Firstly, is talk about economic poverty elimination. It is a core poverty elimination policy. The government should guarantee the legitimate rights and the interests of rural women and ensure that women enjoy equal land rights and interests with men, as well as various agricultural subsidies stipulated by the state. Next, strengthen skills training, increase the proportion of poor women participating in training, carry out practical skills training, vocational skills training, and improve the ability of poverty elimination. The third point is help rural women who stay behind or return to their hometowns to start a business and find a job in various firms and develop poverty elimination demonstration bases. The next is encourage small secured loans and other funds to help poor urban and rural women. Next is talk about policy in health and culture. In the aspect of health measures, the government is supposed to ensure women have equal access to basic medical and health service, establish a regular screening system for women's common diseases. At present, most areas have implemented the two cancers, like cervical and breast cancer, relief projects for poor mothers in rural areas to solve the problem of poverty caused by diseases for poor women. Next is establish health prevention and rehabilitation service networks, which can cover urban and rural areas to improve women's health service. In the aspect of cultural measures, government should fully implement the principle of gender equality in education and focus on solving the problem of compulsory education for girls in poverty-stricken areas and ethnic minority areas. Subsidies girls from poor families, especially girls with disabilities, to receive inclusive preschool education. Next is talk about social security. Firstly, strengthen the social security of impoverished women and include impoverished women's families in relevant policy systems such as medical insurance, endowment insurance, unemployment insurance, and guarantee the minimum living. Next, gradually increase relief and subsidy standards for poor women. In addition, in the charity project, the Women's Foundation has carried out a series of charitable projects, such as the Mother Entrepreneurship Recycling Fund project for single parent and extremely poor mothers, such as the Mother's Parcel project, the Mother's Water Cellar project, helps to improve the basic living conditions for women in impoverished areas. Next slide is possible policy can be implemented. A woman's family and work balance fund can be established. Subsidies to poor women workers in the form of cash and provides them with small low-interest loans to help poor women improve their living environment and improve women's economic status in the family. Next is provide certain income tax relief policies for companies which employ poor women because enterprises bear the responsibility of social poverty elimination and increase attractiveness of poor women's employment. Also eliminate the gender discrimination faced by poor women in employment. Then improve the in-kind subsidy mechanism, such as for women who are pregnant, frail, and sick, as well as elderly who have lost the ability to work. Timely care subsidies food, nutrition, medical resources to ensure their health conditions and meet their basic living needs. So, in conclusion, our government has been vigorously practicing poverty elimination work, has made remarkable achievements, but in the past women's poverty elimination work, there are still some problems, some policy limitation. It lacks pertinence and they are not effective when implemented in practice. The current poverty elimination policy mainly take family as a unit, and the default assumption is that government subsidies are fairly distributed among family members. The poorer the region, the more unequal the distribution of household resources. Women have fewer disposable resources than men, and usually they bear more responsibilities. Within the community, the resources discrimination is also widespread. Like, for example, in the poverty elimination policy, the object of small loans is not all poor women in rural areas, but to those relatively poor households with certain education, certain business ability, but the lack of startup capital. So in conclusion, the importance of women's poverty elimination is not fully understood, and the policy input is not enough. Then I will pass time to my group mates to talk about some poverty elimination plan.
Hello everyone, my name is Liang Peng Wei. Today my part is about Women Poverty Alleviation Plan. General requirements. Implement the basic strategy of target poverty alleviation, the requirement of the China Women's Federation, educate and guide poor women to carry forward the full self-spirit, and stimulate the motivation of poor women to seek prosperity and development. Adhere to counties and districts with poverty alleviation and development tasks as the main area, focusing on poor women and continuously increasing the income of poor women, effectively improving rural women's entrepreneurial and innovative capabilities, and ensuring that women across the country step into an all-round well-off society at the same time. And the main mission: implement target poverty alleviation actions, preferential discount funds for women's entrepreneurship loans to poverty areas, issue small loans for women, create demonstration bases for women's entrepreneurship, carry out training services for women's ability improvement, support the development of women's entrepreneurship and employment projects, and help poor women develop, provide legal aid services to poor women, and improve the living and development environment of women and children. And the implementation steps and goals. Organization research stage. It bases on a precise poverty alleviation survey conducted by the National Offices of Poverty Alleviation. We mobilize grassroots women's organizations to enter the village and households to investigate and verify and assist relevant departments in formulating poverty alleviation plans based on the number of poor women, family income sources, labor and reasons for poverty, career, a national women's poverty alleviation action work promotion meeting to deploy poverty alleviation task, and the advocate stage. The Women's Federation and the Poverty Alleviation Office have established a comprehensive publicity platform through radio, television, newspaper, and related social media to widely publicize the relevant policies and the party communities and governments at all levels to guide poverty alleviation. And this is the full implementation stage. Fully implement the poverty alleviation action for women, strengthen skill training for poor women, implement financial support, develop specialty industries, and carry out loving assistance to promote poverty women to get rid of poverty and become rich. Strengthen practical skills training to improve the self-development ability of poor women, promote the local government to ensure that impoverished women enjoy inclusive policy training, adhere to the actual needs of women as the orientation and carry out training programs suitable for the characteristic women in multiple forms and channels. Strengthen support for credit funds to help poor women and get rid of poverty through entrepreneurship, lower the standard for women's microfinance, and improve the accuracy and effectiveness of microfinance. For poor women who have the willingness and ability to start a business, strive to achieve one entrepreneur and one household out of poverty through financial support, strengthen industry-driven support, and broaden the channel for poor women to get rich. Focus on regional characteristics, industries, tap resources, advantages, and develop advantageous poverty alleviation projects, such as planting and breeding, agricultural product processing, rural e-commerce, and rural tourism. Drive more women out of poverty and become rich. Not only has it upgraded the new women's entrepreneurship demonstration base, but also relied on the existing women's entrepreneurship demonstration bases, cooperatives, and major professional households to give play to their role in getting rich, helping the rich, and helping poor women help each other out of poverty. Vigorously develop e-commerce entrepreneurship, women's handing, knitting, and housekeeping service projects, and lead and drive more poor women to get rid of poverty, and strengthen Women's Federation promote the treatment of two cancers and free examination for rural women. The policies of eye and guarantee for several diseases of the poor, and increase the awareness of policy and the participation of the people, promote free inspection for the two cancers of rural women, and supplement and the government's livelihood projects, coordinate with relevant departments, and increase the free inspection for two cancers of poor women of the right age, and ensure that they are tested and treated as early as possible, and continues to increase the support of the National Women's Federation and the Poverty Alleviation Offices to increase assistance to poor women of the two cancers, and strengthen the integration of social resources, and improve the living and development environment of poor women and children. Let the Women and Children's Foundation play a role, seek support for charity and other non-profit organizations, and ensure priority support for key areas and groups. Guide and encourage more social forces to carry out psychology, legal assistance, production assistance, and other service activity for poor women and children. And these are some safeguards of poverty alleviation plan, strengthen organizational leadership, poverty alleviation, and gradually realizing common prosperity is an essential requirement of socialism. Strengthen public opinion pro-agenda agenda widely publicize various policies for the benefit of the people in poverty alleviation among women, strengthen the assessment mechanism, supervise and inspect areas with slow work progress, and poor result rectify within a time limit and report quality signs. For areas with fast progress and significant result, preferential evaluation and funding arrangement are given. And this is my own part about this. And my teammate Zhang Jiali will introduce the next part. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Zhang Jiali. Now I will make a summary for our presentation. According to our research, poverty is not only an economic phenomenon, but also a structural social problem. The gender difference in poverty is essentially the concentrated reflection of unequal gender relations in the world on poverty issues. The development of the world's needs to enter a more equal, inclusive, and sustainable track, and women's cause is an important yardstick to measure. Based on the above case analysis, we have summarized 3 kinds of methods to solve the problem of female poverty. The first one is policy and legal protection. From the perspective of policy protection, the Chinese government has put forward the governance concept of adhering to the basic national policy of equality between men and women, and protecting the legitimate rights and interests of women and children, and has issued improvement policy mainly in terms of social security, cultural education, and economics. From the perspective of legal protection, at the end of 2008, 13 provinces across the country have established a gender equality evaluation mechanism for laws and policies, and introduced the concept of gender equality into all aspects of legal policy formulation, implementation, and supervision, so as to protect women's rights and interests from the source and promote equal development of new opportunities for men and women. The second method is the contributions of social organizations. China women's organizations, dominated by the Women's Federation, have set up special funds to support women's poverty alleviation through charitable activities, ideological education, and publicity activities. Under the leadership of China Women's Federation, social organizations in various regions actively participated in the process of women's poverty alleviation, starting from skills training, project support, social life education support, and make fair to the local government agents' resource allocation in some poor rural areas. The third effective measure is to introduce new concepts in the ideological field and to reform citizen social concepts. In 1995, the United Nations incorporated the gender perspective into women's anti-poverty work at the Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing. As a result, China has introduced the concept of gender mainstreaming and listed women's poverty as one of the most important social issues. After that, more and more new thoughts about anti-women's poverty gradually came into China. Scholars actively introduced new ideas of anti-women's poverty from a single economic dimension into multiple dimensions of physical and mental health, education, and concepts. Especially for ethnic minority and rural poor women, scholars believe that we should start from the perspective of gender, and that women have a health body and equal gender awareness in order to achieve a complete alleviation of poverty. Finally, in response to the common shortcomings of the policy and the cases we mentioned, we have proposed some improved measures. The first one is the government and the relevant people need to further consolidate the result of the policy of the poverty alleviation, establish a long-term mechanism for women's poverty alleviation and prevent women from returning to poverty. The second one is to redefining the concept of women's poverty. The concept of women's poverty is not limited to the economic level. Mental factors, such as the concept and mental health, is also important. Hence, we need to pay attention to the education level of poor women, achieve cultural and spiritual poverty alleviation, and pay more attention to women's education and the mental health issues. At last, encourage women to devote themselves to the anti-women's poverty work. In the process of formulating poverty alleviation policies, women's participation should be increased from multiple dimensions, and women should be provided with more opportunities to participate in the different fields as a reference. And this is the end of our presentations. Thanks for listening. This is our reference list. The last part of our presentation is the Q&A session. If you have any question, please feel free to raise it. You can type the question in the chat box or directly use the microphone to talk to us. If you have no doubt about our presentation, then we have also prepared a question to ask. That is, what problems existing in current women's poverty alleviation work?